In this video, we'll be taking a look at 3 college basketball games happening on January 26, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 6 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 3 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Louisville versus Duke. Cameron Indoor is going to feel like a jet engine tonight, and everybody in that building is going to act like Duke is already halfway to a win before the ball even goes up for the tip. Duke comes in with an 18-1 record, sitting comfortably inside the top 5 in the polls, unbeaten in Atlantic Coast Conference play, and riding a long, loud home streak that has turned Durham nights into a sort of weekly basketball festival. On the surface, it looks like one of those polite blowout evenings where the visiting team gets a handshake, a check, and a nice memory of hearing the student section for the first time. The market has leaned right into that story. You have Duke laying around 7.5 points at home against a ranked Louisville squad that sits at 14-5, still in the national top 25, and only 3 games back in the league race. That number says a lot about how people still trust the logo on the front of the jersey more than what has actually happened between these two teams on the floor this month. If you roll the tape back to the first meeting, the script looked very different from the reputation. Louisville punched first, then punched again, led by as many as 12, and walked into halftime up 9. They hit 10 threes in that opening half and had Duke wobbling in their own building before reality, regression, and a painfully cold shooting stretch kicked in. The Cardinals then went 2 for 17 from deep after the break. Duke turned into a layup line and shot about 71% in the second half, and what felt like a statement upset morphed into an 84-73 Duke win that still landed just under a total in the low 160s. That is the funny part about this matchup. Even in a game where both teams took turns shooting the lights out for stretches, the score barely crept to 157. So the scoreboard in that first battle looked high, but given the pace and the shot making, it could easily have gone even wilder. Instead, it showed us something more subtle about how these two teams can pull and push each other into uncomfortable stretches. Since that loss, Louisville has started to look a little more grown up. They did not just beat Pitt, they hammered them by 41 points, 100-59, which is the kind of score line that makes you check the box score twice. They followed that up by handling Boston College and Virginia Tech by double digits, and that matters because those are the sorts of games good teams use to sharpen their habits rather than just survive. The other key piece is the guy who was missing the first time around. Freshman point guard Mikel Brown Jr. sat out the original Duke game with that back issue, then finally returned against Virginia Tech, threw up 20 points and 6 assists, and reminded everyone that this Louisville offense hits a different ceiling when there is a true conductor. Having a real point guard instead of a committee is like having one air traffic controller instead of 3 people waving flags and hoping planes do not bump into each other. Everything looks calmer, more organized, and the panic possessions late in the clock start to shrink. There is also the rematch angle here, which coaches secretly love. This is a quick turnaround, so Louisville's staff has fresh scar tissue from that second half collapse, plus a full game of Duke's counters saved on film. They know exactly how and where the Blue Devils flipped the script, and they have had time to cook up small tweaks rather than overhaul the whole plan. On the other side, Duke now has to deal with a version of Louisville it has not actually seen yet, one that includes Brown Jr. running the show from the opening tip. In terms of who is available, the injury report is pretty straightforward, which is almost a luxury this deep into the season. The Atlantic Coast Conference's first report for this one has Louisville missing only reserve wing Connie Ruths because of illness and depth guard Spencer Legg, with stretch big Ali Khalifa listed as probable. For Duke, the only name in bold red is backup center Ifeanyi Ufechukwu, who is out for the year with a knee injury. So the main cast on both teams is ready, but Louisville is actually closer to full strength than it was in that first clash, simply because Brown Jr. is back in the rotation. When you put all of that together, you do not get some automatic coronation for the home favorite. You get a top 20 scoring offense that already proved it can land the first punch in this exact matchup, now with its lead guard available, walking into a revenge spot where the line still treats Duke like an unstoppable giant. It is not hard to picture Duke still winning the game while Louisville keeps nudging and clawing this thing into a two-possession margin that never quite breaks open, the kind of script bettors quietly love. As our first pick for this matchup, the Louisville Cardinals to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Now let us talk about the total, because that is where the numbers on the board start to play mind games. Odds makers basically looked at Louisville scoring around 87.8 points per night and Duke sitting north of 85, did the simple math, and hung a total in the mid to high 150s. On Fox's line page, you see a number around 157.5 with that same Duke minus 7.5 spread attached, which almost invites you to say, sure, points, lots of them. On the surface, it feels like an overgame, no question. Two high-scoring teams, a nationally televised stage, a loud building, and plenty of shot makers usually add up to a fireworks graphic on the screen. But if you go back to that first matchup, the story is a bit more complicated than both teams score a lot. Louisville went nuclear in the first half, Duke stumbled around for a while, then turned into a machine after halftime, and even with all that chaos, the final total still stuck at 157. That just barely slid under a closing total that sat somewhere around 161.5 to 162.5. Since that night, both teams have actually leaned more into control. Duke handled Wake Forest 90-69 by dominating the glass and living at the free throw line rather than just launching threes for fun. Louisville's last four opponents have scored 73, 62, 79, and 71, a stretch that includes that 100-59 demolition of Pitt and the 85-71 win over Virginia Tech, where the Cards won the rebounding battle 44-31. So while the reputation screams run and gun, the recent evidence whispers that both sides are fine grinding games down when it suits them. Duke's defense has quietly become the grown-up in the room all season. They are giving up around 65 points per game and have been sitting in the top tier nationally in opponent field goal percentage, which tells you they are not just winning track meets. Louisville, which used to feel like it was built strictly for offense, has drifted towards something more balanced, with its season average allowed dropping under 70. That shift does not sound dramatic, but for totals it is the difference between a track meet and a game where every loose ball and every missed rotation suddenly matters. The rematch factor plays into the total as well. With a full game of film already in the bank, both staffs know the comfortable spots, the easy actions, and the soft underbelly of each defense. So the counters and the counters to the counters usually show up, and that tends to slow things down. Early possessions can feel like two teams checking each other's homework rather than racing out in transition. Brown Jr. changes the tempo equation too. When the Cardinals melted down in that second half of the first meeting, a lot of it came from wild, frantic possessions where no one quite looked sure of the plan. Now there is a primary decision maker who can drag them into a set, use the clock, and get them into something stable. That kind of late clock organization is great for efficiency but often trims a few possessions off the game, which matters when you are staring at a total in the high 150s. Cameron Indoor gets loud, but it also has this funny way of shrinking games. The court is the same size, yet every possession feels a little longer, the help arrives a little faster, and both coaches are more than willing to trade tempo for control when the standings are on the line. In a spot like this, you can easily imagine long half-court trips, plenty of free throw checks, and both defenses digging in for stretches instead of simply trading haymakers. When you consider that the market only trimmed a few points off the first meeting's number despite more film, a healthier Louisville backcourt, and a Duke team perfectly satisfied to win with defense and rebounding, the Points Festival storyline starts to feel a bit overcooked. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Penn State versus Ohio State. Ohio State steps into this one at home in that big, loud bowl of scarlet in Columbus, carrying a record around 13-6 overall and roughly 5-4 in conference play. They are scoring in the low 80s per night and giving up a bit over 70, which is a nice blend of comfort and controlled chaos for a favorite. Across the court, Penn State shows up with a 9-10 type profile, still stuck at 0-8 in league games, and their numbers look like a team that tends to give back every bit of progress it makes. They score in the mid to high 70s but allow a touch more than that, and you can feel it in those stretches where one bad run turns into a landslide, like that trip to Wisconsin where things snowballed fast and never really stopped. Ohio State, on the other hand, has been living in that territory where they may not dominate every minute, but they keep finding ways to tilt the full 40 in their favor. They have taken 5 of their last 7, including that overtime grind against Minnesota where they leaned on the glass, the paint, and the whistle, which tells you they can win pretty and win ugly in the same week. That is the kind of personality that matters when you are asked to cover a chunky number at home, because sometimes it is not about style, it is about being relentless when the other side starts to leak confidence. The spread sitting in that double-digit neighborhood, around 12.5 in some spots, is not nostalgia for the brand on the jersey, it is a reflection of the gap in how these two teams handle stress. Penn State on the road often ends up chasing, pulling up for quick jumpers, and playing from behind both on the floor and in their own heads, which is exactly how a favorite slowly stretches a lead from 8 to 12 to 15. Ohio State at home under this staff has leaned into a clear identity, more heavyweight in a small ring than track team, with physical drives, trips to the line, and enough depth to keep fresh legs bumping and leaning on you for the full night. There are some injury notes around the edges, a missing front court body here, a red shirt there, and a questionable depth piece on the Penn State side, but nothing that flips the basic shape of how each rotation behaves. The only real caution flag is the classic backdoor cover, where one sleepy stretch or a bench run lets the underdog slide inside the number late. But when you stack up current form, home comfort, and how each side responds when things start tilting, the evidence keeps nudging toward one team being far more likely to control the scoreboard margin from start to finish. As our first pick for this matchup, the Ohio State Buckeyes to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Books are hanging the total in the 154.5 range for a reason, and it is not guesswork. Ohio State games have leaned offensive this season, with their own attack pushing into the low 80s and their defense, while solid, still living in a world where opponents score into the 70s often enough to keep box scores inflated. Penn State games point in the same direction, because when you have a team that allows a shade more than it scores, and that number is already in the mid to high 70s, you do not exactly get a parade of 60 to 55 finishes. Think about the way Ohio State home games feel. There is usually some tempo, a steady stream of drives, fouls, and free throws, and once in a while a stretch where both teams trade buckets for several minutes because nobody quite settles in defensively at the same time. The market has been pricing their home totals in that higher band all season, whether it is a conference opponent or a smaller program coming through, which is a subtle way of saying the environment itself tends to pull scores upward. That is not just math. You can picture it, a crowd roaring on every run, players feeding into it, and possessions turning a little faster as tired legs forget a rotation or two. Penn State adds fuel to that kind of game script. When they fall behind on the road, they often speed things up trying to claw back, taking earlier threes, pushing in transition even when the numbers are not perfect, and accepting the trade-off of giving up easier looks the other way. We saw that kind of pattern in that ugly loss at Wisconsin, where points piled up on them early and the rest of the night turned into a long uphill chase that did nothing good for the defensive numbers. If something similar happens here, you are looking at extra possessions, more late-game fouling, and that frantic closing stretch that total bettors secretly love and coaches secretly hate. Injury-wise, nothing in the current notes screams that either team will suddenly reinvent its offensive or defensive personality. Ohio State is still built to score with pressure at the rim and enough shooting around it. Penn State still leans on energy and streaky shot making more than lockdown defense, and both rotations look stable enough that we should expect more of the same patterns we have already seen. Of course, there is always the risk that both teams go cold on the same night or that whistles dry up, and totals can die that way, but when you blend their scoring profiles, defensive leakage, and the likely game flow if the matchup tilts toward a chase, the picture that forms is a game that wants to live in a high-scoring range rather than a slow, clogged one. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Arizona versus BYU. Arizona heading into Provo on Monday, January 26, 2026, has that classic late-night feel where you can almost hear the crowd before you even look at the line. You have the top-ranked team in the country walking into altitude, an undefeated run hanging in the balance, and a spread that basically tells you, yeah, you figure it out with your buddies. Arizona shows up at 20-0, and the numbers are silly in the way only a juggernaut can make them look, winning by nearly 22 points per game and living just under 90 points a night on offense with field goal accuracy north of 51%. That is the stat sheet equivalent of your controller being set on rookie difficulty, and it matches the eye test because they score in transition, in half court, and off the glass, so there is no single groove you can knock them out of. BYU is not some cute spoiler either. They are sitting at 17-2, ranked 13th, riding a 13-game home win streak, and they are coming off a rivalry game where they piled up 91 points on Utah in a 91-78 win, with their freshman star dropping 43 and the rest of the backcourt happily joining the party. So emotionally, they are rolling, and if you have ever watched a team in that kind of groove, you know confidence can feel like an extra player on the floor. The spread sitting around Arizona favored by about a bucket, roughly 1.5 points, is the market's way of admitting that Provo is wild but that the underlying talent gap still matters. You glance at the efficiency stuff, the KenPom-style numbers, and they quietly lean the same way. Arizona right at the top overall with both a top 5 offense and a top 5 defense, while BYU sits in that top 15 range with an offense around the top 11 and a defense in the top 25. In simple terms, Arizona has more ways to win a spread than BYU has ways to steal it, because the Wildcats can play fast or slow, can lean into defense or offense, and can survive a cold stretch, whereas BYU leans much heavier on that perimeter punch and the emotional surge of the home crowd. There is also the human side that does not show up in a box score. BYU is coming off that huge rivalry high, which is amazing for confidence but can be tricky to bottle 2 games in a row, especially when the follow-up is not a soft landing but the #1 team in the country. On the health front, recent injury reports show Arizona's rotation clean for this one, and BYU's main pieces are not flagged either, so we are really talking about these teams at close to full strength rather than some weird short-handed version. Arizona already has checked boxes against heavyweight opponents this season, with wins over programs like Florida and UConn on neutral and tough floors, so walking into another high-pressure environment is more of a familiar assignment than a brand-new test. So when you put the resume, the flexibility, the efficiency edge, and the small number all next to each other, it feels less like a true coin flip and more like one of those lines where the atmosphere is doing a lot of the talking for the underdog, while the sturdier profile still belongs to the road favorite. As our first pick for this matchup, the Arizona Wildcats to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. A total line this high only shows up when both squads play like the shot clock is optional, and here that reputation is earned. Arizona living near 90 points per night, BYU hanging in the mid-80s, and both treating possessions like chances to race rather than chances to grind. If you watch either team for 5 minutes, you can feel that rhythm. The ball barely pauses. One missed shot often turns into an instant push the other way, and the scoreboard tends to jump in chunks, not in slow drips. Arizona under Lloyd this season leans into that identity. They run at every chance. They attack early in the clock. They crash the offensive glass. And when they do not score on the first look, they often fix it at the free throw line, where they are averaging close to 20 made free throws per game. BYU is almost the perfect dance partner for that kind of chaos. They are very comfortable firing from deep, hitting threes at around 37%. They move the ball, and we just saw them drop 91 on Utah with that 43-point explosion from their freshman headliner and strong support from his backcourt teammates. So you are not guessing about whether they can keep up with a track meet. They just showed they can run that kind of race. Under the hood, both offenses sit in that top 15 national neighborhood by the advanced efficiency numbers, so it is not just empty pace, it is good shots, smart spacing, and a lot of possessions that end in points instead of wasted trips. On top of that, both teams draw fouls at a heavy clip, Arizona especially, and BYU knocks down free throws at north of 75%, which is exactly what you quietly want when you are thinking about a high total, points coming in with the clock stopped while tense fans are chewing through their nails. Now, to be fair, there is a very real counterpoint. Both defenses are strong by those same metrics. Arizona grading out in that top 3 range, BYU around the top 25. So it is absolutely possible that this turns into a more physical, slightly choppier game that drags the scoring closer to earth. That risk is not imaginary. It is the main thing pulling against the number. But when you stack up the tempo, the willingness to run, the polished offenses, the foul drawing, and even the likely late-game script, where a tight finish often brings intentional fouls and quick possessions, the picture still tilts toward a scoreboard that stays busy. Current projections have this looking like something in the neighborhood of an 82-80 type game, and in a contest with that style and these shot makers, it is very easy to imagine stretches where the scoring comes in waves, then gets a final push from the whistle in the last minute or two. So while 165.5 is high enough to scare off cautious bettors, the way these two play makes that number feel more like a challenge than an overreaction. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.